Today I'm going to use Landon. Now Landon's one of my students who's been with me since day one. And I'm just going to use him to kind of let you see the lines and where your feet should be, your knees, your hips, and kind of work from the floor up. We're talking about MMA, and I have to defend a takedown, especially on the world stage. It's usually a 2 or 3 minute fight as youth, and it's really a race to the takedown. So I want to make sure that my feet have a good wide base as far as front to back. When he faces the camera, you see his feet are wide and his hips actually set down in between his knees, and his hip girdle kind of sits down. That's slightly different from our kickboxing stances. In my MMA stance, my hip girdle sits down. In a kickboxing stance, I can allow movement from my hips, but if my feet are too close together, and sometimes I'll just get ran over. So I start with the feet. I want to make sure good and bent, good soft knee. His weight is sitting back on his hip. His shoulder, his hip, and his knee is in alignment. I would say probably 60% of his weight is on his back foot. His hips are in a line, pulled under his body, under his shoulders. Shoulders are rolled forward. Elbows are in front of his body, chin tucked. Elbows are in, hands are in good alignment, hips, chin, good stance, good shell. When it comes to my shoulders, I want to make sure that my back shoulder is all the way back, and that allows my lead shoulder to kind of protect my chin and protect my face. It's almost as if he's shooting a bow and arrow. I want to make sure that shoulder's back, and that allows me to get proper turn on my punches, protects his face, protects his posture. I just want to show you a few things that starts to happen as you get tired or as you lose focus in a fight, and your structure starts to fall. So again, I started with your feet and your base, and I want that to be where everything comes from. For weeks at a time, we'll do our stance drills where our kids just drop their hands and they just work on keeping their hips in a line, keeping their feet wide. We don't want any of those indeliberate takedowns just from bad foot position and hips. So some of the things that'll happen, this back leg when you get tired starts straightening, and what it does is it makes the weight go to your front leg. It makes you float and it makes you really off balance, okay? That's one of the things that happen. Something that happens sometimes is the butts come out, and that's really just going to make you fall behind when you move and make your punches, you have to reach for your punches. So we want to make sure that we're always keeping that back leg bent and always keeping that hip in. Okay, some of the things that happen here, as you get tired, your elbows start to flare down, makes your hands drop, and they start to flare out, which makes your hands drop. So I really want to keep my elbows in front of my body, allows my chin to tuck, everything to be good. The last kind of point is I want to make sure that I'm not getting square and showing my chest. So I'm always kind of shooting that bow and arrow, turning my shoulders, and I'm able to throw punches, kicks, everything from there. The next thing we're going to talk about is some of your movements and your slips and your rolls, and just how you'll catch punches for MMA. And we don't want a lot of reaction. So Landon's in a good position, a good stance. And when he's here, if you notice, his elbows are already where they need to be. If I go to a body shot, all he does is crunches down. He doesn't go far to a body shot. What I don't want is I don't want somebody who, when I throw something to the head, their elbows come up. And when I throw something to the body, their elbows come down. Okay, our stance, we should be there. And all our slips and our catches is we're just kind of tucking our elbow to our rib and leaning forward, making sure, yes, sir, good. Give me just a couple of those, Landon. All he's doing is tucking his elbow to his body, keeping his head slightly offline. Good, turn and face me. When he's slipping and when he's moving his head, he's making sure to move his head forward, boom, on the slips. Just slightly forward. And this will build to his slip drill. The next thing I want to make sure I'm able to do out of my stance properly is roll. Okay, so Landon's facing me, good base, hips are under him. So all he's doing is shifting weight from one leg to the other, doing a U with his head. Got a couple more. His hips are staying under his head the whole time. Good. And now as you can see, his head's doing a U to go under the punch. He's rolling, his legs are bending properly and keeping his hips under his head. Some of the first things I look for when we're looking for bad habits and slips and rolls. Okay, the first one on a slip is I want to make sure that we're not slipping and pulling our head back as we're slipping, as if we're slipping away from a punch, because the next punch is just coming a lot harder and a lot faster. So making sure I'm not slipping away, I'm keeping my chin tucked down and slipping forward, boom, Boom, good. Also, something that happens is we tend to slip out. When I slip, I want to keep my slip in between my knees and my hips, and we tend to slip too far sometimes. Way out here, we're offline, give me a couple off. Anytime his head gets outside of his knees, the slip is too big and he's off balance. And now on the roll, obviously it would be rolling with your butt out and not really bending your legs, but dipping your head. And it's pretty easy to see where the issue would be there. Okay, and so that we're making sure that at all times our hips are under our shoulders and our chest so we're not dropping our head. The next part of the stance we're going to talk about is baseline movement. We're going to talk about the 4 directions you should move and kind of how your feet should be placed so that I'm never bringing my feet too close together, again, avoiding the easy takedown, and on the other side, being prepared to stop a takedown at all times. So landing's in a good stance, and I want to make sure whatever direction I'm moving, if I am moving this way, it's this foot. If I am moving that way, it's that foot. It's whatever foot is the direction I'm moving, that's the foot I move first. And that's going to keep me from crossing up my feet. So now we're going to talk about the movement and making sure we're moving our feet properly. Landon is moving this direction. He's going to push off of his back foot and step with his front foot and freeze. We're being specific by taking steps and not sliding. When he catches his rear foot up to his stance, he's going to take a step. Good. Step, step. Every time. Step, 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 step. Moving backwards is, again, uber important. I have to make sure I tuck my chin when I move backwards. That's a habit that you see at the highest level start to develop. Guys move backwards and they pick their chins up. So I want to make sure I'm keeping my chin down. I'm moving backwards, so my back foot steps first, step freeze. Good. Hips are staying in the right place. And now he brings his lead foot back to a good stance. Good. Step, step. Small steps, keeping his shoulders facing forward. Good stance, good. Moving side to side is me as a professional fighter. One of the first things I check when I train with my partners is I check and make sure they're able to move side to side properly without crossing their feet up. So that's one of the first things I look for in youth MMA. I want to make sure our stance, we're able to move in all directions before we start learning how to strike and kick and defend. So Landon's going to face the camera for me, and we're just going to move to our left now. We're moving to our left leg would lead first, and our back, so we like having a little rule, our lead leg takes a step and our back one takes a smaller. So your back step is always trailing and taking smaller steps. Okay, so Landon's moving to the left. He steps with his left foot, step, 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 making sure we're stepping through every movement. Good contact with the ground, good. Now, Landon's going to come back. Same deal. Our back leg now is the one that has to lead. We're a little wide, and then we catch our stance up. Boom. Step, 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 step. Good. Now we're going to talk about just a few things in the stance with movement that we're trying to avoid, and kind of starts happening as the fight goes on, as your legs fatigue, as you lose mental focus. Okay? So Landon's in a good stance. I've talked a lot about step, step. That's one of my first checks, is I want to make sure that I'm stepping and not sliding. What I don't like about a slide, if Landon steps, step with your lead foot, and he starts to slide. As he's sliding, during that moment, he doesn't have a good connection with the ground. Without having a good connection to the ground, I can't imagine that I have force and power to stop a takedown. So I need my feet connected to the ground at all times. Big problem number 2 that happens is when we move laterally, and laterally transitions into circular, right? Like in that circular motion. So let's slide a little bit there. So what happens is people take a step with their lead leg, and then they allow as they're moving to the left, they allow their back leg to trail too much, and it gets them inside of their stance and their base is bad. Okay, so we're trying to look and make sure that we're not being lazy and allowing that back leg to trail too much. It's always a short, yeah, that's tough, right? Good. Okay, now when we talk about moving laterally and looking at issues, the first thing I look for is when you start getting tired and fatigued, you start allowing your back, you start putting more weight on your front leg. That's part of your issue. But you start allowing your back leg to slide and to trail too close to your base. So Landon, in a good stance, he's taking step, step. He's taking short steps with that back leg. When you start getting tired, you take a big step with that back leg, your legs, you see him right there, already start getting a little off balance. So then he does it again, and he takes a bigger back step, and now just a little push in his hips, and he falls. And so I really need to make sure the whole time, if I'm moving laterally particularly, making sure that I've always got a good base with my feet, and they're stuck in the ground. After our 4 straight directions, I believe circling is probably the most important, but I want to make sure we can obviously move laterally first before we start circling and spiraling in or spiraling out. Okay, so the biggest thing, Landon's making sure that he's keeping his step going as he's circling and angling his shoulders, making sure he's fighting, never trailing the leg too much. Good. Now he reverses back, the same deal, circle, circle, circle. Easy movement. The same fundamentals that happen on your laterally and your forward and backwards happen. I want to make sure that it's small steps. I'm keeping my hips, my hip girdle down between my legs, and I'm never letting my legs kind of trail and get a little too loose. One of the first movements we're going to start with as far as defensive movements, down blocks. Okay, so a down block in wrestling, a down block in jiu-jitsu, they'll all look slightly different, and that's all because of the level change. In MMA and in fighting, we're allowed to stay tall, and a lot of times we don't. Wrestling shots aren't from your knees, so we don't need as big of a level change. So as Landon down blocks, he just circles that leg away just enough to get to square as he circles. Just moving that lead leg just enough, because I don't want overt reactions. Fighting is based at the highest level off of reactions, and I want to have a very small reaction. I just want to move this leg out of the way just enough so I can circle and square properly. Okay. Now we're gonna map that over to the wall. Okay, so as someone's backing Landon into the wall, he's gonna start circling one direction, boom, right off gate before he hits the wall. So that's gotta kind of be programmed in. Now we're gonna map our circle movement and our lateral movement onto movement as we're backing up towards the wall or being back towards the wall. So we're avoiding the opportunity for easy takedowns, and I want to make sure I'm moving my feet to do it. As an opponent encroaches, all I'm doing is making sure that I'm not allowing my back to get to the cage, and I'm circling away as soon as he gets within my range. Okay, and then obviously if it's the other way, he's coming, Landon's gonna make a big movement that way and circle, circle, circle. So sometimes circling may not be your best answer, and just going side to side might not be your best answer. So we also, for an encroaching opponent, have a pivot, and all I want to make sure is that I step outside of that opponent's line and pivot. Good, one more. Boom. As Landon steps outside, he moves his head over that lead foot to slip any attacks, and he pivots using that mat. That should be your general outline of a youth MMA stance, and probably translated over to an adult stance as well. I just specialize in youth MMA, and that's where everything I show from an MMA standpoint will come from. Landon has had 30 plus fights now, and everything we do are things that we have shifted and changed and helped map to an MMA template, and that's all we're trying to bring.